Okay, we got a question for you. Ready?
Okay, what's the question?
What is the difference between private and personal property?
Private and personal property. Okay, so this is a really good 101 topic that I think turns off a lot of people who might otherwise be interested in leftist thinking.
It's turned me off in the past.
Okay, so I guess what's the classic question is, why would I be a socialist? I don't even get to have my own toothbrush because there's no private property. So there's a huge difference between private property and personal property. Personal property, in the scope of what we're talking about here, is the things that a person has and the things that a person owns for their own needs and consumption. So your toothbrush is personal property.
Okay.
And that is, of course, determined by whatever mechanisms you have in place. So if you have like a little barter system or whatever, you barter for the toothbrush, you have the toothbrush. It's your personal property. Cool. Private property is not actually property in the direct sense that you're thinking about. It's not a thing that you own. Private property is more of a social relationship between a person, the owner in this case, and someone else's resource. So for example, private property might be a mine, like a coal mine. That's the very rawest form of the private property there, but really what the private property there is ownership over your work if you're a miner. So if I have that mine and you work in the mine, I am entitled to some of your work. So essentially, it's, as I said, a social contract more than it is the direct property. Sure, the mine exists, but the mine is really tangential here because you could live in a mine, theoretically. Really, what's important here is that relationship, that entitlement to someone else's work, to someone else's resources.
But when you're a kid and walking out by the train tracks and it says danger private property, they don't mean danger people work here and we're exploiting them.
Probably not, like, okay, maybe not, probably not. There's a good chance that is true. There is a good chance that that's a work site and that there is exploitation going on, but the sign that says warning private property probably doesn't actually mean that. At least in the Marxist sense, in the economic sense that we're talking about when we're talking about socialism and communism.
So socialism and communism leaves room for me to own my house.
Absolutely.
And own my farm.
Yes. For example, in Venezuela, which is a modern socialist experiment that's working pretty well, everyone does have housing.
In the comments.
Everyone does have a home. Everyone has housing. Of course, there are exceptions to the rule, but in those cases, excess was redistributed to make for sure that people had some. So people who had like 3 mansions, 2 of those mansions were taken away by force and they were given to other people. So other people had homes. This might not sound desirable if you're the guy with 3 mansions, but if you're the 60 people who get a house afterwards, it does sound a little bit better.
Okay.
And really, that does draw that distinction. You have 3 houses. At some point, you are exploiting another's work in order to have those extra houses. Like, you can't just will that into being. So.
Well, how do you draw the line between then personal and private property? Like, at what point does my car turn into exploitation rather than just being my car?
Well, that's a good question, and that's determined by the individual communities involved. If you have a national communist system, like, for example, how China did, they'll pass laws in order to make determinations to that effect. And typically those cases are pretty damaging. They're pretty destructive because the people in the central city really don't have any idea what it's like in the individual, like, smaller locations. Mm-hmm. So they're basically passing down laws and dictums for other people. And so that's sort of a broken model.
But that happens in a consumer-based economy too, doesn't it?
It absolutely does. It absolutely does. So a lot of the things that people are concerned about with socialism and private property actually happen in capitalism too. We just don't really talk about it that way.
Right, there's the whole thing where cops in the US take your property if they suspect you're guilty of a crime and then just keep it.
Absolutely, absolutely. And police exist to protect private property. That's why they were created in the first place.
So they protect private property but not personal property.
Theoretically, they protect personal property, but that's not actually what they came into existence for.
Okay.
And that's not primarily what they do. And that's the reason why white-collar criminals don't go to jail, whereas whereas normal people do. Normal people encroach on private property. They pose a threat to the capitalists, whereas the capitalists are ultimately taking a lot of personal property, and they are enforcing those social relationships to exploit. So there you go. That's the difference between private and personal property.
Okay.